Hi, everyone, and welcome to Career Talks. We have such a great guest for you today. I want to bring him onto the screen. He is an international career and leadership coach. He is an executive recruiter, an author, and a YouTube sensation, Andy LaCivita. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Andrew, thank you, man. That was quite an intro. I appreciate that. Great to be here with you. I also want to say, I know it's Veterans Day. Thank you all for your service, and anybody who's supporting their country, really appreciate it. That's not lost on us. So I'm glad we could do this on your day.
So when it comes to interview questions, and there are so many, there's all the common ones, but what do you see as the main issues that people run into? So
it's a great question. We get warmed up with a tough one here. It's not a softball question. And, well, Andrew, I mean, if you think about interview questions, but think about, I think there are a lot of issues when it comes to the questions, but I actually think one of the biggest challenges, or the one that's most problematic, it's not just for the job seeker, it's the same one that I would say for the job interviewer. And that's during this discussion, regardless of what questions are being asked, can you surface the information that is going to help the job interviewer actually achieve their goal? And when you think about what's going on during an interview, or even before an interview, you got job seekers speculating what questions they're going to be asked, trying to package up responses they think are effective, maybe even trying to memorize them, which is really hard to do and really hard to recall under duress. And you have, on the other side of the table, you have job interviewers who make their job more difficult in actually getting at the information that they need to achieve their goal. And that is, I mean, to state the obvious, ultimately the job interviewer has to make a determination, is this job candidate going to perform well in our environment? Is the person in front of me going to perform well in our company in the future? And if you think about that, where we get a lot of interview questions that are asked about our past and where we've been, but ultimately we need to decide, how are you going to perform tomorrow? Because that's what we're hiring you for. And as a job seeker, getting the questions, regardless of what type of question you get, if you know what the interviewer needs and how they're going to use the information, I think it'll make it a lot easier for you. And the other thing is, you can make it easy for them to make that determination and achieve their goal, or you could make it very, very difficult. And when you asked me about interview questions, what I would say is, if you just forget interview questions for 1 second, if you just think about an interview in terms of time. And I just talked about the future because this is what you're really interviewing for, right? You're interviewing for a job you will perform at some future date. And if you think about any interview question that you get asked, you really can only be asked, as it relates to time, 2 questions. Questions about your past and questions about your future. So however employers want to wrap these up, whatever fancy packaging they want to put on them, you're ultimately being asked either, what did you do, or what will you do? That's it. That's all you can ever be asked. And once you understand that, it's going to be a lot easier for you to respond effectively. And you might be thinking, well, Andy, hang on, I get all these different types of questions that they ask. That's right. In HR speak, or recruitment speak, or interview speak, or whatever you want to call it, employers generally use 3 different formulas, or formats, let's call them, to ask you questions about your past and about your future. And I think that's what we're going to chew on today is what are those? And you might have heard these by different names, but generally speaking, you've got behavioral interview questions, which effectively go after or help the interviewer try to determine what your behaviors were in the past, what traits or characteristics based on how you acted or behaved. There's also project-specific questions. These are more domain-specific, how-tos, things about your subject matter expertise. How did you do that task? How did you do that project? And then the third one is situational questions. These are the what would you do questions. So we've got this problem. How would you solve it? We're hiring you to build out this team. How would you do it? Case studies, those kinds of things. So just to recap, I think it's understanding based on the different question types what information the employer needs. So behavioral, project-specific, and situational. They might be called some different things by different people, but generally that's what you need to address.
Definitely. Yeah. And, when you look at those three topics, obviously, sometimes people in the moment, they could have struggle saying, okay, well, this is behavioral, project specific, situational, and preparing for all of those. And, some people, they've heard of the STAR technique as a way to answer questions or approach something. Can you tell us a little bit about what the STAR technique is? What are your thoughts on it? And, are there any alternatives to addressing these questions?
Okay, great question. So if you think about, okay, so STAR technique is a technique that can be used for various question types. But if you think about the ones I just mentioned, behavioral, project specific, or situational, the behavioral interview question is the one that a lot of coaches and trainers recommend using the STAR technique for. And we'll define what these are in a second. But if you think about behavioral interview questions for a moment, and I'd love to shed a little light on what these are and why people think the STAR technique is effective, and what I would recommend. So behavioral interview questions, just to get started, are, as I mentioned, they go after your behaviors. So employers think that your past behaviors are a predictor of your future behaviors. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that. That's a philosophical discussion for another day. But all I care about is you're going to be asked these types of questions, and I want you to be ready to answer them. So when you think about behaviors, they also ask you to reach into your skull here and come up with an example that will demonstrate the behavior they're looking for. So the behavioral interview questions, they sound a lot like, tell me about a time when. Tell me about a time when you overcame a challenge. Tell me about a time when you created organization out of an ambiguous situation. Tell me about a time when you disagreed with somebody, something like that. And these questions are difficult for the job seeker because they're asking you to choose your example. And the reason that this is important to understand is because the STAR technique, if you've heard of this, is an acronym that stands for situation, task, action, result. This is a formula that trainers and coaches and teachers tout as a way to answer especially behavioral interview questions. And the reason that this is a risky approach is because the S itself, the situation, if you don't choose correctly, and remember, we're talking about helping the job interviewer actually project how you're going to perform in the future. If you don't pick an example that makes it easy for them to do that, or you don't pick an example that they like, they're likely going to tune you out and you're not going to score really well. So if you dive right into the situation, you're going to run that risk. So Andrew was asking about, what are some of the techniques that I like to do for behavioral specific questions? If we can take those first, I like you to share something that will help them understand how you'll operate in the future, independent of the example you choose. Give yourself a little insurance policy where no matter what you're about to say, whatever example you're about to choose, the employer is going to like you. And I think it's probably a little easier to address this in an example. But the first thing I would recommend is giving them your viewpoint on whatever the question was, and then walking them through the process of how you handled it or would handle it, and then giving them the benefits and the outcome. So it's probably a little easier to digest this with an example. But if we take that disagreement one, for example, it's a touchy question. Tell me about a time when you disagreed with a coworker or a teammate or something like that. With the STAR technique, you could dive right into the example, but if they don't like the example, you're not going to score as well. So what I recommend in my technique is to actually initially give them your philosophy on how you would handle any disagreement. So if I was asked that question, instead of diving right into the situation, I might say up front, I have a great example where a teammate and we disagreed about a customer solution that we were trying to implement. But I think what's important about this particular situation is I handled it the way I would handle any disagreement, which is anytime I disagree with somebody at work, it's likely because we're trying to come up with the best solution or what's right for the team or the customer or the company. And that's all that matters. Or maybe we're talking about priorities. So the first thing that I think you need to do is actually listen to the other person. What is their viewpoint? Am I missing anything? Is there anything I don't know about the situation? Anything I'm not factoring in? And then after I listen to their viewpoint, I like to think, instead of just pitching my case, is there a way we can combine what they're saying with what I'm thinking? Is there a combination solution that's even better? So and, not or. And then if at that point I'm not sure and I want to make my case, then I give them my viewpoint. But this situation with my coworker, I first listened to what she had to say. She filled me in, and we were able to come up with a solution that was even better. and then go into what your results were. So what that does is it helps get them in the right frame of mind that regardless of what comes after your philosophy, if they agree that you are someone that they like the way handles disagreements, they're gonna want to hire you. And think about what you just said. You probably took 2 minutes to take a negative question and answer with, I'm a great listener. I'm looking for the greater good. I'm not going to become defensive. I'm a team player, right? And all of these things that you were able to stuff in with something that's generally a negative question, imagine what you could do with something that's rosy. So just think about that. If you dive right into a situation that they don't like, it's going to be risky for you. But I like you to go through a little bit of your philosophy first. And so just to kind of recap that technique that I would recommend, the first thing that I would do is give them the process. So what is it and how do you think about what they just asked you that transcends the example that they're asking you for? And then what's the process that you would go through? So 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, whatever it is. And then ultimately, what are the benefits or what was the outcome?
Yeah, no, that's really good. And also, for everyone asking, I see in the comments a lot of people saying, oh, hey, will this be recorded? You're in luck because this will be recorded. And all you have to do is once we're done having this conversation, refresh the browser, come back to this link, and you'll be able to watch it again and get all of Andy's great tips. So I know a lot of people are wanting to dive in even deeper into the conversation. So that's one way for you to do it. But going back to the STAR technique, I know, just from my own research and also existing in tech, that a lot of companies have very stringent hiring processes or regimens. And sometimes they'll say, hey, we want you to answer our questions by the STAR technique. So if you're sort of forced into that box, how do you approach that?
Wait, Andrew, that's a great one because I'm not watching the chat here. I hope you guys are having a great time. But I'm guessing that probably some people probably asked that immediately as I was going into my alternative approach. And there are a lot of companies that do this. I do a lot of coaching with people who go into companies like Amazon. They say, we want you to use the STAR technique or in the interview right while you're there. And so what I say to those people is, okay, well, that's all right. Let's honor what they're requesting. If they're asking for the STAR technique, then what I would say is you want to make sure you're getting your philosophy in. If you would like to go right into the situation, there's a couple of different alternatives that you can do to get that insurance policy in there. So, for example, that one I was talking about with the disagreement. So there was this time when my coworker and I were disagreeing about a customer solution. And then what you can do is intersperse your philosophy in the steps, in the task itself or the actions you took. So the first thing that I did was I listened to her approach. And then she shared with me what she was thinking. And the second thing that I always do whenever I'm disagreeing with somebody is I want to look for a combination solution. So you could actually mix the philosophies in there and break it up, or you can add it at the end. But the one thing that I want you to know is it's really important that as you prime, it's a technical term for starting out any response, email, presentation, or whatever. Priming the other person is moving their emotional state to where you want it. The sooner you can get the goods in up front, you're going to get them in the right frame of mind. And the things that they're going to hear in the wake of that, they're going to be in a better frame of mind. It'll sound better to them. So in this case, you might need to, instead of priming it all up front, you might need to prime it a little bit along the way. But that's what I would do if I was forced into a STAR technique and somebody asked me to do it that way.
Yeah, well, you got big kudos from Giovanni, who says that he likes your approach better than the STAR method. So you got one taker in there at least.
Thanks, Gio.
But and one of those things is that project specific questions, and I think a lot of times people have been asked about this, and maybe they didn't know it was a project specific question. But can you tell us what those are and how they're different from behavioral interview questions? Because they're really interesting. I like getting them. So what is your take on them?
Wait, so I love this and I like getting those too. And let me tell you why. Now let's go back to what I kept. The reason I wanted to explain all that stuff up front about the past and the future is because remember, we got to get them into the future thinking, and you got to make it easy for the interviewer to connect the dots. The behavioral interview questions have you go back in your past and potentially pick an arbitrary example, which makes it difficult. A project specific question, is much better for you. If they've asked you a project specific question, what they're asking you is they're likely going to your resume or something you previously said in the interview, and they're saying, can you explain to me how you did that? And I stress the word how, because there's a difference in a behavioral interview question. A behavioral interview question is a what kind of question. They're asking you for a what. A project specific question, they're asking you for a how. And if they're asking you for how you did something, it probably means your resume was well written and you wrote a bullet or paragraph in there somewhere that got them excited and they just wanted to know how you actually performed that project. So with project specific stuff, you're walking them through the steps that you took. But before you go into what I like to call an outline of the steps that you took, if they say, Andy, how did you implement that customer system? Before you dive in, again, going back to my priming examples here, what you want to do is you want to give them context. You don't just want to give them the how-to. There's a couple things you want to tee up. The first thing is you say, okay, I would love to explain how I did that. I think the one thing you need to know before I even go into that is why was I even doing that project in the first place? So that customer system that we were trying to implement, the reason we were undertaking this project is because our call times for our customer service reps were really high. Customers were on hold a long time. The calls were taking longer because they didn't have the right data at their fingertips. Customers were unhappy. Our revenues were not as high as they could be because the customer service reps didn't get a chance to upsell because the customers wanted to get off the phone so fast. So what you're doing by planting this in the front is you're giving them the impression, because you implied it and they will infer it, that this was a really important project. And that matters just as much as what you actually did, the gravity of it. So now they're thinking probably automatically, okay, you're going to tell me how you actually fixed all that. And then as you go into the body of your answer, where you're going to give them, and these are generally asked for your bread and butter skill. I'm the accountant who closes the books every month, or I'm the marketer. How do you run those campaigns every month? Or I'm the project manager that implements these technologies on a large scale. They're basically focusing on things that you should be good at, where you have an outline for how you did it. So if you're a project manager and you were implementing this customer solution, the best way to approach the middle part of your answer is tell them what you're about to tell them. Well, that project was great. And I went through the 7 stages that I normally go through anytime I go through and implement an IT project of that magnitude. And so I initially got the stakeholders together. We talked about the requirements. We architected the solution. We designed it. We developed it. We integrated it, and so on and so forth. And you want to get that out very quickly, because what you're giving them is a map of your response. So now what you're going to do with your answer is you're actually going to fill that in. And the reason you want to give them the map first is why? It sounds like a system. It sounds like the person who's telling me the story has a framework, a methodology, a system. And wouldn't you say that when you go out and you buy anything, wouldn't you pay more for a system than you would for a point solution? So you want to impress upon them that there is a method to what you did. And then you walk them through each step, you go back, you walk through your outline, and then you go to the end and then you give them the outcome. And so after we were done with this, the call time shrank, the revenue went up, or whatever you can point to were the benefits. Your customer reps were happy, your customers were happy, whatever it is that you can get in there. But that's the way you want to package it. So just to recap that little formula there, you want to give them the context initially so they understand the magnitude of what you're explaining. How important was this? Then give them an outline. That outline is your bread and butter. That's the stuff you do very frequently. They're likely asking you how you did something because they want to know your skill set and your knowledge, your working knowledge of what you do. And then you always want to get in the benefits. But this way, if you give them those 3 sections, it's going to sound a lot richer. And I'll tell you what, you say for 10 seconds, when you rattle off those 7 steps, 10 seconds might be $10,000 more on the salary, and you're planting the seeds. These are really good questions, and they're also about your past, but now we're getting closer to helping the interviewer project how you're going to operate in the future. So those are some good ones.
Definitely. And I really like what you talked about buying a system, because I always like to tell people employers are selfish and they want to know what you're bringing to them. So instead of just being able to say, hey, I did this thing this one time, saying I have this framework, or sort of laying it out for them to say, I have this great system in place or even implying it, it shows what they're going to be getting out of the deal. And really that's what they care about, is not necessarily what you've done in the past for so long, but they are really caring about what you're going to do for them. And they're buying that system, like you said. So I think that's really great. And now moving on to the next part, we talk about behavioral and project specific. What about situational questions? And those are also, I find them fun, but some people might not. So what's your approach for situational questions?
Okay, so for all you hirers out there, or even, it makes no difference. Remember what I said. How are they going to operate in the future? The behavior is about the past, and even the project specific stuff is still about the past. But if you are getting a preponderance of situational questions, I guarantee you the employer is going to hire right. They know what they're doing, because most of the interview should be spent in this section, even though it usually is the opposite. So situational questions, what are those? So I alluded to them up front earlier when Andrew was asking me about the biggest challenges. Situational questions are anything. It's anything that asks you what you would do in the future. So we have this customer. She's been difficult to handle. What would you do? What would you say? We're looking to hire you for a practice leadership position to open up new markets on the West Coast. How would you go about that? Hey, we have this case study. We want you to come in and whiteboard this, or we want you to give us a presentation or something like that. So a situational question is really anything that has to do with how would you do something? And it comes in a variety of formats, but those are fantastic questions. And what I would say there is, much like the project-specific questions, now for the situationals, you don't have to give them the context up front because it's not something that you've already done. So in situational questions, you could go right into your mental representation, your outline, or whatever you're carrying with you that is your framework, your methodology, your structure, and you walk them through. So if I was building out the team on the West Coast, the first thing that I would do is I would look for the customers. I would segment them. I would see what kind of accounts we're dealing with. And you just walk them through whatever the stages are for building a new practice. And that's really is all there is to it. And if you want to get fancy, if you want to really be on your game, and this is especially important for executives, is as you're walking them through the scenario of how you would go about it, most people, what they do is they walk through the scenario perfectly. I do 1 and then 2 and then 3, except we all know life doesn't happen that way, right? So the more advanced you are, if you can insert the challenges that you are likely to encounter along the way, that's going to give you some bonus points. And whether you solve those challenges in the past or whether you are just the thinking on your feet and you know that that's likely what you're going to encounter, you're going to get points for recognizing that you're about to encounter obstacles because you've either seen this or anticipate this. And that's really all you need to do for situational questions. Don't overcomplicate these, but make sure you have an outline and that you show your work. So those are the two biggies. So just to recap that, you don't necessarily need to give context because there really isn't any. I would have a how-to outline for how I would go about my bread and butter stuff. That how-to is your methodology. And then also make sure you talk it out, that you show your work and you explain to them why you think what you think.
Yeah, no, that's really great strategy. And actually, I am not the only one who agrees. Jemima said this is a wonderful strategy. So another big fan in the comments. And, obviously, and you mentioned that, for situational, there could be something that maybe an executive level candidate could do differently or emphasize. And obviously, I think things differ sometimes depending on where you are in your career trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes down, should people do something differently if they're maybe entry level in these situations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wait, that's a great question. So I know we've got a lot. And I love this. We got a lot of demographics here, all ages, lots of different countries. I just music to my ears hearing all that in the intro. For the newer professionals or less tenured or college graduates, or even if you're coming out of high school, the one thing that you want to do is number one, you obviously you don't have a lot of work experience where you're drawing on a lot of examples from a professional standpoint. Employers know that, so take some comfort there. The most important thing if you're a new professional, regardless of the question you get asked, is you want to pull examples or ideas whether it's school projects or whether it's internships or anything of that nature, you still want to show your work and you want to have frameworks for how you've solved some of the questions that you're likely going to be asked. So for a college student, I might ask them, tell me about a time where you organized something or you solved a problem or something like that. The most important thing for you, much like I was describing in the project specific questions or the situational questions, have your outline. So if I was faced with a question like that, pick any school project, pick any internship or anything and say, give them the formula. Well, I handled it just like I would handle anything that I would organize. First, I inventoried everything. Then I categorized it. Then I prioritized it. Then I did this and that. And then here's what I did. So when I inventoried it, here's what I did. When I categorized it, here are the categories I put them in. When I prioritized them based on these concepts and so on. So when you're a new professional or a recent college graduate, that is your ticket. You do that in your responses, you'll get hired. You really will, because people don't approach their responses that way. They really don't. They want to just start right in and go right to it.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good approach. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have people who are more tenured in their careers, or sometimes they call themselves seasoned employees. And what about, for older workers, how should they approach these questions? And is there anything they should do differently?
Mm-hmm. So as you folks are near and dear to my heart, I'm 55. So these are my over 50 crowd, my brothers and sisters, so don't let anybody tell you ageism is not a thing. It is a thing. It's not insurmountable, but it is present. And you're not fighting the fact that you have a lot of years of work experience. What you generally are fighting is the biases that people who are interviewing you have about you as a more tenured employee. And the very common ones are, and by the way, I'm not saying these are true. I'm saying these are the things that you want to diffuse. So, the energy's not going to be high, or they're set in their ways, or they're not willing to learn anything new, or their techniques are outdated, things of that nature. So what you want to do there is, when you get into the interview, obviously you want to be energetic, you want to be upbeat, you want to be enthusiastic. You want to make sure, even before you get into the interview, that your resume is filled with newer nomenclature, right? You're using the latest terms. You're doing things to convert any old tactics you have to kind of new vernacular. If there's training programs and other things that will help you get the interviews. And then when you are in the interviews, when you're telling your stories, make sure that you are using current terminology and that you are talking about your understanding of the latest trends and where the market is going. And we even, when I coach a lot of people in that demographic, even in the over 40 crowd, all the way up to 78. And so one of the things that I do with them, and this is a really neat trick, I kept talking about priming. And the reason that this is so important is, in addition to priming discussions, you drop breadcrumbs early in the process. I'm a big preemptive guy, right? I believe in an ounce of prevention. And so a lot of times what we'll do is, when I'm dealing with somebody who's a more seasoned professional, I'll say, one of the biases that you have to overcome is they don't think you want to move quickly enough. They don't think you're fast enough. They don't think you're on the edge. And a lot of times when you get asked questions like, why are you open to leaving your current job? Or why did you leave your most recent employer? Or anything like that, insert things like, they weren't moving fast enough. They were too slow for me, right? I'm looking and learning these new things. They're in later technologies. They're not pivoting the company fast enough, and things like that are already starting to diffuse some of the biases that people tend to have when they're interviewing an older worker, especially if it's a younger interviewer. So that's what you're fighting. And there's a load of techniques that you can use, but those are a few fast ones that I think will resonate with the crowd here.
Definitely. And, and like you said, ageism is a real thing. And one of the things that happened during the pandemic is that, for the first time, really, we had a recession where people who were maybe in their careers for a few decades or more were starting to get laid off. Usually it's typically the newer hires or people who haven't been in the workforce as long. So as a result, we saw people who were executives or senior management at a company being laid off during the pandemic and the recession. And, if you are in those positions where typically maybe you haven't had a job search in a long time because you've been climbing the ladder, people have been reaching out to you, but suddenly things got very difficult for you in the job market. Do you have any tips for them? And I know you're executive recruiter, so I'm going to
No,
assume yes.
I do. So actually, I do have a lot of tips for them. Let me tell you this. So, and I know because you asked the question about as it related to the job search as opposed to the job interview. So I know I hit a real quick interviewing tip about inserting problems along the way in your stories, whether it was project specific or situational. But I will tell you this: the senior folks, and I see this a lot because Andrew, you nailed it. I mean, like I deal with a lot of people in their 50s. They've never job searched. Right? They've been recruited or they've had a nice continuous run and now they're finding themselves searching for the first time. But I would say not just for executives, but I would say what I'm about to tell you transcends demographic. Most people, you shouldn't know how to job search. That's not your forte, right? You're an ace at something else. I do this every day in my life. And so what I say to people is you're agonizing over putting your resume together. You're agonizing over prepping for interview questions. The search itself and the reason people have a difficult time is because they're not actually job searching. They're not actually identifying target companies, reaching out to people at those target companies and sending them the proper cover letters, networking messages. I have a technique I call boss hunting. And one of the things actually, not to get too much into this, but I have a job search challenge where you need to condition yourself to reshape the way you think about how you bring yourself to market and get into the habit of getting this information and your information out to the world. You don't have a resume problem. You have a marketing of your resume problem. You don't have an interview problem. You have a marketing of you problem. So, and senior executives, this is really prevalent is they get stuck and they're spending time putting resumes into applicant tracking systems, which is very difficult. And even if you're a new professional, it's very difficult, but especially people who are of the senior level. But I would say my biggest tip is if you're looking, make sure you're actually job searching, targeting companies, identifying people to target, sending them messages directly. So that'd be my biggest tip. We're going to spend a whole week doing that next week. So it's that's what I would say.
Yeah, no, I think those are great tips. And then obviously, one of the things that really changed during the pandemic, and also before we get to this, I just want to remind everyone, we're going to be taking your questions in a little bit. We have so many already, but keep them coming and we're going to get to them. But one thing that really changed during the pandemic is basically video interviews. And I had heard from so many recruiters, so many hiring and talent professionals who said, oh, I never hire anyone without meeting them in person. And suddenly we were in a position where that wasn't possible for a lot of jobs. In some cases it was, but for a lot of them, all interviews were forced to happen over video, like we're chatting right now. So what are your tips for people who have to interview via video? Is there anything that changes because of that? I don't think necessarily the content may change that much, but what do you tell your clients and tell people?
Yeah. Thank you for inserting that. The content doesn't really change because that saves me from having to address that. The tips we're giving you and the tactics you're learning, use those. With video, there are a lot of things you can do. And I won't go into all the simple things like make sure your setup and all that good stuff is okay. But there are a couple things about video interviewing that I think really, they may sound silly and they may sound easy, but I guarantee you these will set you apart. So I think there's a couple things. Number one, you want to be in the frame, right? You want to be in a good setup. The light goes on the opposite side of the camera. Even if you don't have great video, audio matters more than the picture itself. But if you can get some lighting on yourself, that will help. And if you can get decent audio, that will help. And if you don't, it's not like you need to go out and buy lights. If you just put your computer in front of a window, hopefully you're doing this in the daytime, that will be good enough. And you want to just make sure that you're in the frame. But the most important thing that you should do in a virtual interview is when you're responding to the person, go directly in through the camera. So it's okay, just like Andrew and I are doing here. When he's talking, I'm looking at my screen to watch him because it's giving me more sensory cues. But when you're speaking to somebody, you want to go directly in through the camera. And you say, well, Andy, I don't talk through a camera a lot. I didn't either. So one of the things that I would do, hey, it's Thursday. If your video interview's next Friday and you got 8 days, for 5 minutes a day, can you open up your laptop or your little webcam or whatever and just practice getting comfortable with that? Because what you don't want to do, which you probably see a lot of people doing, is they're having conversations with themselves before they're and then they're saying, okay, to say this and then go through the camera instead of just, I don't know how many of you are here right now in the chat. And I know Andrew's there and I can see him in my peripheral vision. But I know we're having a conversation, or I like to think so. And in an interview, give them your response. It'll be way more engaging, right? Use good packaging in your responses. And then when they're going to talk, just look down at them and see what they're doing. And I think that would really help. I mean, this is not new. A lot of you guys have been doing this for a year, but those are a few simple tricks to really make it better for you and how you look.
Yeah. And actually, one of the best tips that someone gave me on early in the pandemic was, because it is awkward when you don't look at the screen, because, like, you know, if I'm looking at you right now, it's a little bit awkward. There's a disconnect. But if I'm looking directly at the camera, it's more that we're making direct eye contact. It's more natural. So someone said, we'll put googly eyes next to your video camera. And so I did that for the first couple months of the pandemic, and it got much more natural. So if anyone, not that anyone is visiting because it was pandemic, but they would see a camera with googly eyes on it.
Wait, I love that. Can I tack one on? Because you just reminded me. The other thing to make it easier on yourself to put, like, so if you know, a lot of times we're on Zoom or we're on Hangouts, put it so that it's set up so that the person that you're talking to, if it's just one person, if this was just me and Andrew, I would have his face right underneath my webcam. So I'm barely going up and down. But whatever cue you need, that's a good one. The googly eyes. I love that.
Yeah. And also, and your tip about the sunlight is fantastic. Indirect sunlight will beat 1,000 really expensive lights that you get from the store or online. And I have 2 big ones right here right now. But if I can move my desk, but if I can move next to the window, I wouldn't have them up. So, well, let's dive into some questions. I monopolized the time enough. And so get your questions in. We won't be able to get to all of them, but I promise we'll get through as many as we can. And the first one, Andy, is a really good one. And I think everyone asks these. In fact, I asked an interview candidate this one today, is sort of, where do you see yourself in 5 years? David wants to know how to ask that question, because it could be really difficult, especially in a fast-moving world. Like, my job that I have right now did not exist 5 years ago, or 3 years ago, even, when I came to LinkedIn. So what is your suggestion on answering that type of question?
Okay, so I don't love this. Great question to me. I don't love it when employers ask this, because if in 2003 somebody would have said to me, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Open a recruitment firm in 2004 would not have been in the top 100 things in my list. So Andrew's right. These things they change too quickly. But I think regardless of where you would like to go, the tips that I would give you around the 5-year question would be, make sure that you are explaining your ambitions and why they're important to you. So and there's many good ways to respond to this question that I don't think is a great question, but I think there are many good answers. One could be, I continue seeing myself on this trajectory because I would like to work toward whatever this goal is, whatever this function is, whatever this title is, that's okay. But you need to say, the reason that that's important to me is because I feel like when I can get to that capacity, that I will be able to add value to this company, add value to the world, or whatever. And as long as I am on that trajectory, I am going to be okay. And I know I will be happy. And regardless of what that title is, because I know, tomorrow's promise to no one, or the story doesn't always, go the way we think. But as long as I am on that trajectory, I know I'm going to be happy. And I know that because I've been thoughtful about identifying what's important to me, my requirements in a job and a career. I'm proactive and plan my career. Most people do not do that. So anything that you can work in that talks about where you'd like to go, why you'd like to go there. And the reason is because the value I'm going to create is, and the reason I know that this is the right trajectory for me is because I did all this self-awareness stuff. Do you see the elements that go in there? Those 4 things need to be in there. So You can package them up however you want, and you can get into detail about all these different things. But if you hit those things, there's no way they cannot like what you're saying. That's how I would approach that. Back to the formula. So when you're trying to remember what you want to say, you've given yourself an outline of your 5-year plan. Response, that is.
Yeah. And what about, this question comes from Lisa, and what about when they ask you a question and you don't have an example to turn to? Maybe, there's something that, you just sort of blank on, or there's nothing really in your past that you could pull from, and isn't a good answer. So what's your advice for Lisa?
Okay, boy, you know what, Lisa, that's a good one. You guys are, I was hoping I would get some easier questions here. These are good ones. These are really tough, and we know they are. So there's two parts. There's two scenarios that we need to cover. Let's cover a situation where they ask you if you have experience and you don't have the experience. So there's the experience and how skilled you are at something, or can you give me an example of? There's two of these, and they're slightly different. If they ask you about experience and you don't have the experience, there's a formula, 3 parts to the formula. The first thing is, I've yet to do that. Meaning I don't have that skill yet, which you probably should have known because it's not on my resume, right? So I don't have that experience. That's all, or I've yet to do that. That's all you need to say. You don't need to say another thing about it. You've made your point. The second thing you need to do is then reach into your experience. And if you have any analogous experience, like I haven't worked with that product, but I've done this one over here, or I haven't worked with that product, but I've worked with other products that work like that product. Any analogies that you can draw from, and then explain, here's how I would do that. Here's what experience I have. Here's why it's analogous. That's the second part of the answer. And then the third part of the answer is, but anytime I'm faced with anything that I've not encountered before, this is how I approach getting up to speed. Again, methodology of how they get up to speed. And what you need to know is about recency and the way people hear things and the way they remember. They tend to remember not the first thing you said, but the last thing you said. And so what they're hearing is, oh, Lisa doesn't have that, but she's got some experience that's going to shrink her learning curve. And you know what? Anytime she encounters something, I know she's going to get up to speed quickly because she has a great approach. That's if they're asking you about lack of experience specifically. If they ask you for an example and you're now, hey, can you tell me about a time when you had an argument with a customer and you simply don't have it? Then what I would say is, well, I don't argue with customers because I don't interact with them or at clients or whatever it might be. Just explain, in my position, I'm generally not in those situations. Then what I would do is I would offer up an alternative to their question. But I do have a situation where I had an issue with a coworker. Would that be okay if I shared that? So in those situations, number one, and this is for Lisa and everybody, rarely can you not come up with an example or something really close. Because if it was me, I probably would turn to the interviewer and say, I'm assuming you want to know how I argue, how I interact, how I overcome, or something like that. I might not say it that way, but is it important to show you how I handle these precarious situations or something like that? Because if you truly cannot come up with an example, then the next best thing is to come up with something that will be illustrative of the example they were looking for. That's what I would do. Those are two different, you got a twofer there, Lisa. That's how I would approach both of those.
Yeah, I think that's a really good advice. And, when it comes down to, another common question that people get, this question is from Jen, and she wants to know, how do you best handle the questions about your greatest weaknesses and maybe a mistake in your past that you would revisit? Because I think a lot of people, they never understand how to maybe navigate this. And a lot of people, they might fall back on the old, oh, I just worked too hard. That's my greatest weakness. So what's your advice for Jen?
Okay. So I don't want you to do that. Wait, Andrew's right. Because that's what people do, right? There's, I work too much, or I care too much, or no. So wait, now these are two totally different questions. Okay. Now a mistake is, I love that question. I want that question, because the mistake question is, tell me about a time you failed. What is your greatest failure? What's your biggest mistake? Any regret, any of those. Okay. The mistake. Okay. Philosophically, we all need, if I'm making mistakes, I know I'm doing the right thing. I mean, as weird as that sounds, because you cannot possibly advance until you do this. So the most important thing that the employer is looking for isn't what the mistake was. It was how you responded to the mistake that you made and what was the outcome. So what you have a chance to do here is explain your attitude. Mistakes, those don't bother me as long as those are mistakes of commission, not omission. I want to be aggressive in what we're doing. And there was this time when I made this mistake. We had a scenario where we had an engineer once, and he made a mistake. He was an aerospace engineer. The cap of somebody's pen fell off in the space shuttle. It contaminated it. They had to come up with a new process. So what you want to do is you want to tell them what the mistake is and why it was beneficial that the mistake occurred. That could be, we implemented a new process as an aerospace company. We implemented a new process as a team, so the risk was mitigated and that mistake wouldn't happen again. But you want to choose a mistake where you solved it by building a solution that eradicated any or eliminated the possibility of any future mistakes. That's the gold standard of the mistake question. Again, going back to the thing I was saying in the interview portion of this was, do you have a system? This mistake resulted in a system. Okay, now a weakness. A weakness, I think, is a generally unfair question. We don't have weaknesses. The weakness we have to determine, is it a weakness that we have to overcome, or is it just a weakness? If you're not on the sales team, you don't have to be great at sales. You need to be great at something else. And if your weakness is sales, that might not be something you need to work really hard on. So when you're choosing a weakness, what I generally tell people to do is you can offer up something where you have limited experience. So it's not something that you do poorly. It's something you haven't had a chance to do that you know is a skill that needs to be grown. And hopefully you're choosing something that is not vital to the position you're interviewing for. So you want to try to choose something where that's kind of the makeup. So it's, one of my greatest weaknesses is, I don't have as much experience working in these types of solutions here, or something that's not completely related to the position itself. That's the way I would choose those. And then pick something. You don't need to be totally over the top. Just pick something that you would like to grow, but that isn't as vital to getting hired.
Yeah. And I like the example you gave about a mistake, because hopefully no one watching has made a mistake on the magnitude of scuttling an entire space shuttle launch. So that should make everyone.
We got a job. We used that one.
Oh, yeah. So there you go. Hopefully that makes people who maybe the mistake comes to mind not so upset in comparison. And there's another question that came in early on, and I thought it was really good, which is, what if you have someone who asks if you were ever terminated from a job, and you were? Because sometimes, things happen, maybe you grow, you learn, or there's just something that happened in your past where maybe a manager or something didn't agree with you. How do you overcome those questions when it almost seems like, it's pulling the plug out of your chances?
So, well, I know there's probably some people on the show, the live cast today, that know me really well. And I know there's a lot of people that don't know me, but those that do know exactly what's going to come out of my mouth. These are the best questions to be asked in an interview. And it's how you look at them, because somebody is serving up an opportunity for you to own something, right? You know what? I was terminated from an organization, and it turned out to be the best thing that could ever happen to me. And while I wasn't happy with it at the time, here's what it taught me. And so they're looking for your response. Most people at one point or another in their lives have either been surgically fired or riffed in some capacity. People get it. Now, hopefully you haven't been let go from several, organizations, but if it's happened to you, I would just own it and just say, you know what? I was disappointed at the time, but I'm really glad it happened because, and here again, when I mentioned that thing about recency, all of a sudden they see you reacting positively to something, and now you're off sharing what you learned from that scenario. Versus, it was the employer's fault, and I really don't think I should have been held accountable for that. But no matter what happens to us, and there are things, yes, that are outside of our control, but inside of an interview, it will serve you better to own it. and make everything your responsibility. What could you have done to have avoided that if you're going to include that in a response? So believe me, it's not as detrimental as you think to be asked that question because of how common it is that somebody has been let go. So I would turn it positive immediately, because now they're looking at your attitude more so than the rationale of why you were let go.
Yeah, and I assume as a quick follow-up, you shouldn't badmouth that employer, right? You shouldn't say, "Oh, they were trash," and I'm better off without them, that sort of thing, right?
Not only should you not badmouth them, I would probably talk them up. I'm really disappointed because I loved everything about that employer and I really would have loved to continue to work there, but I respect their decision. I understand why. And looking back, this is the best thing that happened to me because, the more positive you can be, the more that will, listen, I know that's probably eating some of you, right? You didn't like your boss. You didn't like your company. You didn't think they were fair. They didn't appreciate you. But in an interview, think all I care about is you and what serves you best. You don't need to go there. But you're right. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and also, and I think your approach where you sort of say, "Hey, listen, I appreciated them, and I understand looking back what happened," because I know people in my orbit who have been in a position where, something that maybe they made a mistake or something, and it was just they were let go because of it. But when they look back, these people years from now, or years from then, actually, they'll look back and they tend to be happier. They sort of see it as a jumping off point for something else, and they see the road in front of them and not sort of a closed door in front of them instead. And so I think you're.
Can I add one thing here? This is something I teach a lot of the people in my community, and they hear this. There are questions that you were asked, all of you were asked in an interview. Any minutes you are spending in what I call defense mode, meaning I'm explaining something, meaning, well, why did you go from here to there? And this, you're in explanation mode. You need to get out of explanation mode as fast as possible. Okay. Don't keep explaining because you're on the defense. And when you're on the defense, you're not on the offense selling yourself, which is why you want, when I said with Lisa's question, if you didn't have the experience, I've yet to do that, and then you move on to offense right away. I explained, I don't have the experience. I was let go for a very good reason or whatever. Get on with what you learned, right? Get on offense. So you want to spend as little time explaining yourself as possible.
Yeah. And we have a question, and I think this is a good one, which is at the end of an interview, usually and hopefully an interviewer will say, "Do you have any questions for me?" And this is from Vivian. So what is your suggestion for that time? Should you ask boring sort of procedural questions, or it's like, how many more interviews do you have to go through, or should you ask more, intense questions, or what's your suggestion for Vivian and people who maybe sort of trip up at the end there?
How much time can I take? Right. Just kidding. I would love to do a session on just this alone, but let's be respectful to the time. So Vivian and everybody. So you win the battle of the questions. So let's talk mindset first. And because I know a lot of people panic because they don't have a lot of time to ask questions. So when you get ready for an interview, you should categorize your questions basically into 4 buckets: company-specific questions, role-specific questions, boss-related questions, and then interviewer-related questions. So you want to make sure that you're categorizing those so that you can pick and choose the questions that you want to ask based on the interviewer you have. And then I want you to think of the interview process as one whole entity. And I want you to assume when you start that screen with the recruiter or HR person, I'm going to win this. I'm going to get the job, which means I have the entire interview process to get all my questions asked. The most important thing for you is to be organized in the way that you ask those questions and organized in your ability to actually know which questions to ask this particular interviewer. It's usually pretty easy to do. Most of the time, you have the interviewer's name or at least their function or maybe both. And if you don't, that's something that you should get early on in the process. And if you've written out your questions or typed them out or however you wanted to do that, when you get into the interview, prioritize the questions. And if you are dealing with somebody who can answer an array of those questions from those different groups I mentioned, You want to go from the top down. You want to ask corporate level questions first, then role, then boss, and so on. An interviewer, I mean, is there something specific to the interview? Don't sweat. If they only give you 5 minutes to ask the ones you can, prioritize them before you go in. And remember that you will have more time to ask more questions. So yes, no, I would definitely, I mean, we spend a lot of time on this stuff because you are interviewing them too. Just remember that, right? So you want to be buttoned up.
Yeah, and I think also what I take away is, you know, anyone who's ever interviewed anyone, I think often they take more from those questions they get asked than sometimes what the answers are in other parts of the interview. So I think, you know, those suggestions are very helpful. And, you know, we started, you mentioned that today is Veterans Day in the United States, and I know a lot of different countries are celebrating sort of armistice days, things like that around this time. So Mark asked, do you have any tips for veterans in interviews? Because veterans also sometimes face biases, you know, especially if they have been a career in the military or anything like that. Do you have any suggestions for the veterans watching today?
I do. And so all you veterans, you have an extra layer a challenge that you have to overcome up front. So and especially if you've been, you know, you've been in the service for a long time. So the issue that you face is when you go into the commercial sector, you've got a situation where, when I was talking before about what's the ultimate goal of the interviewer, how will this person perform in my environment? It's easier for them to connect those dots if you're giving them examples that fit into their environment, which you might not have as a military vet. So you have to bridge the gap between what you did and translate that into how it applies to what it is that they're doing. So if you're, you know, you military vets have a lot of experience, organizational skills, right? Relationship building skills. There's a lot of the productivity, project management. There's a lot of things that you can do well in leading teams and people and being influential and all these skills that you have, and you need to map them before you go into the interviewing process. You need to translate, because you have to do this more overtly, because the interviewers won't take as much time to do that. It's sad, but it's true. And so in order to overcome that issue, you have to bring them closer to how what you've done maps to what they do. The more research that you can do on the positions you're interviewing for, and the more you can translate how what you did is analogous to what they need, it becomes easier. All the other things and the examples, it's the same kind of thing. You might be pulling from examples like a recent college graduate who doesn't have the commercial experience yet. Same kind of thing. I would say the same thing. That little example that I gave about how a college student would answer, well, how did you organize that? Well, I inventoried it and I categorized it and I prioritized it and so on. You will have similar structures for what we call capabilities. So remember, there's hard skills, and these are the exact how-tos that I have working knowledge of this solution, this product, this service. I know how to sell this particular widget. And then there's capabilities, which are the foundational abilities that, again, here's the word, transcend the specificity of this role. So I might not have this hard skill or know exactly how to sell this widget, but I have the capabilities that make all good salespeople good salespeople. I'm organized. I understand human psychology and pain points, right? I have an organized approach in how I listen, communicate, and so on. All of these things are the capabilities. So what you're doing is you're trying to pull out all your capabilities, map those capabilities to the position that you're interviewing for, so that the stories you're telling in the interviews are directly aligned to the capabilities that are needed to make whatever that person is, an accountant, a project manager, a marketer, a seller, or whatever. So you have to overcome that hurdle. You have to work a bit extra hard to draw those analogies and map those points to help those guys connect the dots.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice for the veterans watching. And actually, and before we go, I have a question for the people who've been watching. So for the people who've been watching, we always like to make sure that we are tailoring these presentations to you. So what I want to make sure is that we are asking you what you want to hear and also what you thought of today's session. So we're going to be showing you a link and also a code on your screen that you could take a picture with your smartphone. So either take a picture of with your smartphone or go to this link and answer the survey questions, because we want to make sure that we are getting to the questions that you have about the job search process or career advancement, and also just sort of what you want to get out of these sessions. So like I said, either use your phone to navigate with the QR code, or just go to the link and our producers will be dropping them into the comments too, so you can click there. But we'd love to hear your thoughts. We'd love to hear feedback on these sessions. I know a lot of you said that you were taking notes during it. I saw Christina saying that she was taking notes and hoped other people were too. And just a reminder that after the show is done, you could always click refresh and watch the whole show again and get all the details. It's a really great way to dig into it. And Andy had so many great tips. So make sure that you're going to the QR code and also going to the link and telling us what your thoughts. And of course, I want to thank Andy. Andy, I think, yep, you're still there, right?
Oh, yeah.
There you are. Well, that was such a great session, and I know so many people got so much out of it, and I really appreciate it. And I hope people follow you on LinkedIn, and obviously you are kind of the king of media. You show up everywhere,
I do.
but we also have some places where people can find you. So we want to make sure that they are, following you on LinkedIn, and also where you could find Andy's website.
Academy. Yeah, I'd love to have you. We give away a lot of free stuff. And, there's a lot of aids there and I mean, everybody. We have booklets for military vets. We have things for stay-at-home moms. We have things for seniors and all that good stuff. So there's a lot of helpful content. I hope you guys check it out. You're welcome to connect up with me on LinkedIn. I can't thank Andrew, you enough, and Aaron and Paulina and everybody else who pulls this thing together. What a great team and what a great show. And I hope everybody out there enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed, sharing a little bit of my insight with you.
Yes, and I know I've enjoyed the conversation, so thank you so much, Andy. And like I said, hope people are following you on LinkedIn. And thank you to all of you out there, because these shows obviously wouldn't happen without you. So I know you got a lot out of this conversation, and I hope we get your feedback so that we can make these, even better in the future. But I think Andy's tips and suggestions will be hard to top. So make sure that you are staying safe and also taking care of yourselves, because the pandemic's still in flux, and you can only get hired, you can only be a good candidate if you're safe and well enough to do so. So until next time, best of luck.